Yo, what's up, you guys? It's your girl, Tree the LPC, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Self-Aware and Lift Up podcast. When I tell you guys you are in for a treat this week, I am so grateful to have this week's guest here with me. We have gone through so much back and forth to get him on the show, and everything was kind of getting in the way of that, but we got it all squared away, and I have him here with me today. So I can't wait for you guys to learn a little bit more about him. His name is Simon Rinne. He is a social worker, a mental health advocate. He's also the owner of Mindful Men, as well as the host of the Mindful Men podcast. We're going to be diving in today what he does in terms of mental health advocacy for men and how he works with helping men break down social constructs related to how men are supposed to be. So I'm really excited to talk to him. So without further ado, please welcome to the Self-Aware and Lift Up podcast, Mr. Simon Rinne. Hey, Simon, how's it going today?
Yeah, really good. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks for your flexibility on getting me on the show. I'm going to blame my kids for being sick for the last 2 to 3 weeks, but we're here now. They're back at school. So, yeah, really excited to be here.
Yes, I'm really excited to have you. And I appreciate your flexibility as well. I really wanted to talk to you. So I was willing to move whatever to make sure that this conversation happened, because I really love what you do. And I really can't wait to just really dive in and learn more about you. So I do want to just go ahead and get us started by having you tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a social worker. I live in a place called Queensland, Australia. So apologies for the accent. It can be a little bit hard to understand sometimes. But yeah, I live over here in Australia. I'm a dad. I've got 2 little ones. I'm a husband. And yeah, I have the Mindful Men podcast. I've got Mindful Men, the therapy clinic. And a lot of the stuff that I do in the men's mental health space stems from lived experience. So from 8, I'm now 40. I've lived with mental health conditions, obsessive compulsive disorder, depression, anxiety. I've experienced burnout in 2020. I'm not sure if anyone remembers what happened in 2020, but we had this thing called COVID. So I experienced burnout in there, and that's actually where I discovered mindfulness. So I call myself Mindful Men. But yeah, mindfulness was a big part of my recovery from burnout. I've struggled with alcohol for 25 years, and I got sober at 40. So lots have happened in my life that has informed what I do in the men's mental health space. And we talked about burnout before, and my recovery from that. That was the first time I took off my mask and shared my story with the world.
Wow.
I'd been in therapy since 2012, but this was the first time that people outside of my therapist and my wife had known anything about my mental health journey. So I guess if we can thank COVID for anything, it would be my ability to take off my mask, and so many other men as well. Like, I guess they were encouraged from COVID because we were having discussions about mental health and how everyone's coping. I'm not sure how you went with the lockdowns over there, but we had some of the longest lockdowns in the world over here. And so mental health became an actual discussion that men could engage with. So yeah, that's a snippet of what I've been through. But yeah, happy to dive right into anything and everything to do with men's mental health.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you took your mask off. I think COVID gave everybody permission to take their mask off because everybody was kind of stuck in the house and they had no choice but to deal with themselves. You can only run away from yourself when you have all of these things to do. And we weren't locked down, I'm sure, as long as you guys were, but being locked down for like a month and not being able to get out and do, like regular day-to-day things with people for like several months, like it was a lot. It definitely weighed heavily, but like you said, it provided the opportunity for us to expand, not only, just getting in touch with ourselves, but just having those conversations that were so taboo for so many years. So I'm glad that you were able to dive into that. I wanted to kind of know a little bit more about your personal kind of journey in getting to this place of like a platform of helping men with their mental health? I mean, obviously you're a man, but I want to know what helped you hone in on that particular niche.
So I felt like this need to take off the mask, and I created an Instagram page which had daily affirmations just to keep me going, because I had to take essentially 4 to 5 months off of work. I couldn't function, and I needed positivity in my life. And that came from starting to share the story. And then I created the Mindful Men podcast as a way to record what was going on and my experiences with mental health as well. And so this it felt good to start talking openly about it for the first time in my life. And then as we went on, created the Mindful Men Therapy business as I finished my degree and moved into that space, and just kept going and going and going. And what I found was the more I advocated for men's mental health, the more people came out of the woodwork and which started to share their story, which was great as well. And it just felt empowering. For the first time, I felt empowered in my life. Yeah. Talking about men's mental health and my story, and seeing the inspiration that I'm giving to other people as well. But I mentioned COVID, and it started well beyond COVID, though. Like, it started when I was 8 in the schoolyard. Students said to me, Simon, if you stop using your voice for more than a minute, you're going to lose your voice forever. Wow. And so this created an obsessive thought, an intrusive thought that I couldn't get rid of without performing a compulsive behavior. So I started humming to myself to try and check that my voice was there. And I didn't know this at the time, but this was my entry into obsessive compulsive disorder.
Wow.
And over the years, that evolved into different things. And the humming thing only lasted about 2 years. But around my teens, 13, 14 years old, mum and dad separated, and me and my little brother moved out with mum. So we became the single parent household, and I became the man of the house. I put that mantle on myself, the position or the role on myself. And this is where OCD really went dark for me. And it became this obsessive thought that someone was going to break into our house, steal our stuff, kidnap us, murder us, rape us, you name it. Something really dark was going to happen to us if I didn't protect our family. And so what I would do to do that is I would go around the house, and this was usually at night time when mum had gone to bed, my little brother had gone to bed. I would get out of bed, I would walk around and check every door, window was locked like Fort Knox, like you could not get in or out of it, basically. Wow. And I'd also check that the iron was off, the stove was off, because I also had this obsessive thought around the house burning down while we sleep. And so I would do this for 2, 3, maybe 4 hours a night, up and down out of bed. And I do the loop, and I have to do the loop in a certain way. And this is OCD. You have to do things in a certain way. And I would get back to bed, and my brain would say, Simon, did you really check that door, or did you really check that window? And I couldn't just say to myself, like every other person can, I couldn't just reassure myself that I had checked it from memory, because my OCD brain would take snippets out of my memory and make me question whether I did something. And so I would have to get up out of bed and check that door or window. But it wouldn't just be that door or window. It would be everything again, because it's part of a cycle.
Right.
And so I still do that. And I'm 40 years old, and this started when in my teens. I don't do it for 3 to 4 hours a night anymore. I've got coping strategies now in place that I can. It's a half an hour thing maybe for me these days, which is fantastic. When I'm stressed, it's more, but it is much more manageable. But that one in particular, it hung around, and it manifested in different ways. So, for example, my car, when I got my driver's license, and I got a car, I had to put the handbrake on really tight, because if I don't, this car might roll down a hill, cause chaos.
Right.
Could hit someone, could crash into another car, could crash into a house. And the obsessive thoughts were, I'm going to hurt someone or cause mass destruction because I didn't put the handbrake on tight enough. And so to alleviate that, I would have to go back and check my car all the time. So I might walk away half an hour, and then have to walk back. or I'd be in the middle of a work shift or school or uni, and I get this obsessive thought. It'd be instant. I'm like, something's going to happen with that car. I've got to go check it. And the only thing that would prevent me is if the car was not within kilometers of where I was. So if I caught the train to uni, for example. And so this one has stuck around as well. So this is manifesting in different ways. And ultimately, what I've come to learn, and I didn't learn this until about 2 or 3 years ago, when I actually got first treatment for OCD, was OCD has themes. And when we think about OCD, it's often trivialized. People say, I'm a little bit OCD, or my OCD's, killing me because this PowerPoint presentation, someone forgot to spell a word correctly. There's a misspelled word. And they're like, my OCD is killing me. I'm like, that's not OCD. That's just, and I'm sitting there in silence going, if only you knew what it feels like to check your house for 3 to 4 hours and things like this. And so I've come to learn these themes, and my themes are harm OCD. So the absence of my behavior. So if I don't check the house and something happens to the people living in the house. So me as a dad, I have this, and as a husband, I have this now. If I don't check the house, my OCD shames me because the absence of my behavior, which is the compulsive checking, could cause harm to somebody else. And so mine's a harm OCD. Other people experience that same one. For example, they might be cooking dinner and they get this obsessive thought or intrusive thought about holding a knife to cut their food. And so the compulsive behavior around that could be, and there's different compulsive behaviors for everybody, but it could be that they avoid knives all of a sudden because they don't trust themselves with it. And with OCD, it's not that you believe the thoughts. It's just that, and we often don't believe the thoughts. We know they're irrational, but we also can't not do the compulsive behaviors because the compulsive behaviors reinforce, or they give us safety, they give us security. And so we do it, which unfortunately reinforces the obsessive thought. So it's a bit of a cycle, it's a loop, and it's really distressing. So I've got harm OCD. I've got pure OCD. So pure OCD is pure obsessions. So the compulsive behavior is obsessing. It's thinking, it's ruminating. And so an example of this was with my drinking. So we have a big drinking culture here in Australia. I was a big beer drinker, like a massive beer drinker. Beer drinking and beer, alcohol is everywhere in the media, you name it, it's absolutely everywhere. You can't get away from it. And I would, I started drinking around 15, 16 for fun, like most kids do, but it evolved into a safety blanket. And then as time went on, I was using it to cope with life, like a lot of adults do, like a lot of men do. We use alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex addiction, whatever addiction it is, to put a Band-Aid on and not feel the feelings, or to feel normal, or to de-stress. How many times have we come home from work and say, I need a glass of wine or a beer to de-stress. I've had a stressful day. We're slapping Band-Aids on. We're not actually engaging with the emotions. And so I did that for 25 years. And what would happen with the drinking is drinking gave my brain a night off. It allowed me to just escape my thoughts, escape the behaviors, because I get too drunk to do the behaviors. But then the next day it would say, Simon, you had the night off. It's time to party now. Let's have an OCD party. And that was pure rumination. It was me thinking about the night before. And here comes the harm OCD. It was thinking about the night before because I'm worried about saying something that might have caused harm to someone else. Like maybe I said something that might have offended someone, or I did something that might have offended someone, or it was going to get me into trouble at work. And it was usually at Friday night drinks after work. We'd go out a few, our team would go down to the pub and have a few beers or whatever, or it might be at a family birthday party or something like that. But it was usually a work-associated one because I was really worried about getting in trouble at work. And so the harm OCD was like, okay, Simon, you've got to think about the night before obsessively and ruminate about it because you're trying to check and make sure that you didn't say something or do something that was going to cause harm to somebody else. And that was usually psychological harm from actions and stuff like that.
How did you get out of this cycle? Even the cycle about checking, you say you got it from 4 hours down to 30 minutes. What were the coping mechanisms you put in place to kind of shift this to get better control over it?
I didn't talk about my mental health for 20 years. It took 20 years to go and see a doctor and then go and see a psychologist and then get the diagnoses. It was around the time that I burnt out and created the Instagram page that I discovered that other people in the world live with OCD. I never knew anyone else. You didn't hear about it. And on all these Instagram pages, and turns into TikTok and all the other social media as well, they're all talking about this thing called exposure response prevention. And so I guess this is where the first time I'm like, oh, there's treatment for OCD, and it's called this thing called ERP, exposure response prevention. And despite being diagnosed in 2012, not one therapist, and I'd seen heaps, had wanted to target the OCD. They didn't want to treat the OCD. They wanted to treat the alcohol use and the depression.
Okay.
Because they're the most prominent. They're the ones they can see. They're the ones they can understand. Not many people understand OCD. And so creating that Instagram page opened my world up to OCD and OCD treatment. And so I found an OCD therapist here on the Sunshine Coast.
Okay.
And this is where I first learned about themes. And I learned about how our compulsive behaviors reinforce the obsessive thoughts. And so when we think about treatment, we often think about cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, in the therapy space. It's the most evidence-based research. It's the most evidenced therapy modality in the world. It's the one that everyone knows, everyone refers to, everyone researches. So and cognitive behavioral therapy aims to change your thoughts so that you stop thinking the negative thought, for example, or the obsessive thought, the intrusive thought. With ERP and OCD, I'm saying a lot of acronyms now. So with OCD and doing exposure response prevention, we want to reverse that. We don't want to change the thoughts, because the thoughts will happen for someone with OCD. We want to change the behavior. We want to prevent the behavior. That's why they call it response prevention. We're preventing the response, because me checking the house, for example, for 3-4 hours a night reinforces those obsessive thoughts. It tells the obsessive thoughts that the danger is real. And so I don't want to do that. And so finding ERP as a modality in a therapy for me enabled me to reduce, say, that checking behavior from 3 to 4 hours down to half an hour by changing the way that I check. And so instead of me checking every single door, window, so I said before, it goes around in a cycle. So maybe think of a cycle as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
You do things in an order in a cycle. With OCD and ERP, what we want to do is we want to mix that cycle up. We want to regain control of our brain and say, no, brain, I'm in control, not OCD, I'm in control. So it could be that we do that in reverse. We go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So instead of me starting at the front door, it could be me starting at the back door and doing it in reverse, And so this is slowly telling the brain that I don't have to do it the way that my brain tells me that I should be doing it to feel safe.
Okay.
And so as we progress, and there's different, it depends on your themes, it depends on all this type of stuff. But for me, as I progressed, it was, okay, I've now gone 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How can I mix that even more? You jumble all the numbers up and all the windows and doors up so that you're going, like, instead of going around in a perfect circle, I'm zigzagging around the house. Maybe it's the front door, then the back door, then the back window, then the side gate. Instead of me going around a cycle. So this is me slowly telling my brain, I'm in control. I'm going to choose what I check, when I check it, mixing up the whole cycle. And then it might progress even further. So you might skip a window or a door. Now, this is huge, right? So instead of me checking everything 100%, it's now me checking 95% of the house. And then slowly, as I feel better, I can do less and less and less and less. And so it's about regaining control by changing our behaviors, changing the behaviors that reinforce the obsessive thoughts. And that, since I found that only a couple of years ago, that has been a life changer. So I've been able to significantly reduce the symptoms. Wow. But also getting sober at 40 has also helped, because I'm reducing the depressive symptoms. I'm stopped putting Band-Aids on myself, and I'm actually engaging with those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors internally from a healthy perspective, as opposed to I'm avoiding, which is what I've been doing for 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Like that is a new kind of modality. So you definitely just introduced me to something. I was thinking about a particular client that I definitely want to try that with. So I need to do a little bit more research for sure. But it's, yeah, it's interesting. Like, of course, I'm trained in CBT, so everything I do is about changing the thought. And so this is definitely a different thing, but very, very interesting to learn more about that, because it seems like it's really helpful or has been helpful to you. Because like when you said 4 hours, I was like, oh wow, how in the world did you do that for as long as you did that for? Like that to me is a lot. So kudos to you.
It nearly killed me as well. Like, I had suicidal ideation through it. As a teenager, I was so exhausted. I'd wake up the next day having to go to school, and I'd still do the OCD stuff during the school day and at school and on the way to school and on the way home. But, to do that every night. And people will say, I often get asked, Simon, did anyone notice you humming? Did anyone notice you checking? For 20 years, nobody said a word. Wow. Nobody, I don't think anybody ever noticed. So it was me doing this in the dark, doing this in a way that I kept it hidden. And so that was suffocating in itself. It was relieving to take off that mask a little bit in 2012 when I went and got help for the first time. When burnout happened, I just ripped off that mask and I started screaming from the top of mountains. And that in itself was just like, I am so done hiding this stuff and not being my true and authentic self. Like I was effed up, in terms of feeling like I was living a double life. And so it nearly killed me because like it had me go into really dark spaces and my drinking was out of control and all sorts of stuff. But I think something inside of me kept going, and I don't know what it was. It just kept going, and to the point where I'm doing this now, talking with people across the world about recognizing mental health and having a discussion around mental health, but also for guys just going, you know what, if Simon can talk about this stuff, maybe I can go and talk about my stuff too. And that's a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious kind of to know a little bit more because you've no one saw this going on in your life. Like everybody that was around you, they didn't catch it when you were younger, when you became the man of the house or any of that. And then I don't know if you intentionally hid it or tried to hide what was going on, but did you feel like you couldn't let people know before you got to that place of taking the mask off? Like, was that taught to you? Like, because you use the idea of like a social construct of how men should be. Like, do you feel like that was ingrained in you in some way, or did you feel like you just had to hide this thing?
I think it's ingrained from us from birth. Like when we think about our kids, and I'm a dad now, and we had this discussion, my wife and I, when my son was born, is like, what clothing do we buy him? We go to the shops and we see blue for boys, which has usually got dinosaurs on it or Superman or all this like stereotypical stuff. Pink for girls, princesses, unicorns, all this type of stuff. There's not much other options. And so we were like, actually, we wanted to find neutral clothes and let him explore whatever his identity is. But we couldn't find anything. And so when we think about it, when a baby is born, the gifts are attributed to their gender.
Right.
You get a girl, you might get all this type of stuff. You get a boy, you might get all this type of stuff. And I think for boys, part of that is also this mentality to suck it up, be tough, be strong, be a man, because that's what the world wants. That's what the world expects of you. It's not to engage with your emotions. It's to, if you fall down, to dust yourself off, pick yourself up, and off you go. And I grew up in a place called Adelaide, so not on the Sunshine Coast where I am now. It's the northern suburbs. It's very working class. There's lower socioeconomics in terms of the family dynamics around it. We became the single parent household. There was people that lived on unemployment benefits. Definitely we weren't the high end of town. We're on the wrong side of the track, if you can think of it like that. And so that kind of environment in itself is an environment that also facilitates those kind of discussions. It's like, we're survivors. We work hard. We don't deal with our stuff because we don't have either the financial capacity to or the knowledge to. And so discussions around mental health, and I grew up in the 80s, 90s, noughties, it was non-existent. And we watch sport. So, we come from a very alpha male household. So I've got three brothers. We all played Australian rules football. It's a very masculine sport. We did track and field. We did basketball. We did soccer. You name it, we played sports. And so it's reinforced on the sports fields as well.
Yeah.
You get knocked down, you got to pick yourself up because you'll be the target of the next big hit, for example, on the football field. If you show that you're a bit weak or whatever, it's reinforced in school, with your mates as well. Or, you'd be the target of bullies. If you're someone who is weak or seen as weak, you're the target of bullies. Even teachers would say, I suck it up, come on, harden up, all these types of things, these little things. Even at home, like with my brothers, and we'd watch things like The Terminator, Die Hard, Rambo, hyper masculine movies where the main hero is usually a man, or was always a man, right?
Yeah.
And that man would walk through fire or get shot, get stabbed, but still continue. There'd be no crying. There'd be no processing. It would be just like, harden up, be a man. You got to conquer the world. These are these things that all influence these things called social constructs of masculinity. This is how a young boy version of me saw the world as, I've got to be tough. I can't show emotion. My dad never showed emotion. He never talked about feelings. Yeah. In fact, the only time I've ever seen him cry was 2 times. One was when Forrest Gump came out, and for anyone who hasn't seen Forrest Gump, the movie, I'm about to do a bit of a spoiler. It's a bit old, but what are you doing if you haven't seen that movie? It's when Jenny died and Forrest is sitting in the tree above the grave. That's the first time I ever saw my dad cry. One of the only times I've ever seen my dad cry. The second time was on his deathbed when he was having trouble with his liver a few years ago, and he was close. Like he survived and all that, but that's the first time. And I think he was doped up on drugs.
Yeah.
And so I never had a male role model in my life. I saw my mum cry plenty of times, but not my dad, not a male. And so from a young age, from birth, in many families, he's blue for a boy, he's pink for a girl. Imagine if that pink T-shirt was on a boy, the questions that would be asked, But imagine if that blue T-shirt was on a girl. Hardly any questions at all about that type of stuff. And so from birth, I think we're socially constructed to be a way, and from the environment that we live in, we're constructed to be a certain way. Someone who lives where you live might be completely different to live on the east or west coast, of America. Same with me. It's where we grow up. It's those role models. And so I didn't know how to talk about it. Mental health wasn't a discussion that we had. In fact, mental health wasn't really a discussion we had until COVID. Even though I was diagnosed in 2012, nobody was even talking about mental health back then. Wow. It was still hush, hush. It was still a quiet conversation. And particularly for men who really struggle in this space, COVID was the first time that we actually allowed men to come to this discussion and encourage them to. And there's a real reason that we should be doing this and doing it more often, is we were recording this, it's Men's Health Month. I think it's Men's Mental Health Month over in the US. In Australia, next week, it's Men's Health Week. And you might be seeing a lot of social media. I'm not sure when this will come out, but you might be seeing a lot of social media about men and men's suicide, for example. Men are high proportion likely to take their lives to suicide than than female. And I think part of that is we struggle to engage with our mental health. We don't know how to do it. We don't have the words or the capacity, because we feel shame and stigma and we're unsure what to do about it. On the flip side of that, on the other side, is also family and domestic violence. I'm not sure what it's like over in the US, but in Australia, 90% of victims say that a male is the perpetrator of family and domestic violence or gender-based violence. And this is a real big problem here in Australia. And I think, again, men don't know how to engage in the softer side, so it ultimately becomes like a volcano to a point where it boils and boils and boils so much that it just explodes in violence towards themselves or towards others. And so the more we can have these conversations and normalize it, the better. We can recognize Simon's talking about mental health. I can talk about mental health too. It's okay. We can go against the grain and the social constructs, they're intergenerational. We see what our dad did and what his dad did, what his dad did before that. And so we're following suit. But we're in a moment in time, I think, where we can flip that and we can change that and go, you know what? It's now my time to shine.
Mhm.
And I'm going to shine for my son and his son and his son and my daughter as well. Look, this is not just a male thing. I'd love my daughter to see me be open and vulnerable as well, so that she knows that there are men out there who are safe, they're in control, they can talk about their feelings, and then she can feel safe in those relationships too.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad that you kind of highlight the part on social constructs, because it's embedded in everything that we do culturally. And I'm glad that you're kind of going against that and teaching men that it's okay. Because I mean, as a woman, I obviously know that there's social constructs all around us, but that idea of having to be strong, having to not cry, like that idea of a man, just to me, it's very antiquated and something that probably should have never been, but it was what it was. And it originated from different spaces in time. And I mean, I'm glad that I see more and more men coming at therapy, even in the States these days. And so I love seeing it. And I think it's really, really important what you do. But I do want to kind of shift gears a little bit. I know you kind of dove into this already, but I want to dive a little bit deeper. How do you connect with the idea of being self-aware and fucked up?
That's mindfulness in itself, isn't it? That it's the awareness of how you're going inside. It's acceptance of how things are and how you're showing up in the world. And so for me, for a long time, like most men, I bottled it up and I didn't see myself as fucked up, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't see myself as self-aware. Getting diagnosed in 2012 was a starting point, was that realization that something wasn't right, that I needed to change. And that came after 2 years of my now wife encouraging me. I don't like to use the word nagging. It's probably nagging, but asking me to go into therapy because I wasn't showing up like the way that she knew I could show up. I was drinking too much, all this type of stuff. But from there, like I expected the first time I went to therapy, and probably the next 10 times I went to therapy, for the therapist to just wave a magic wand and I'd be healed and I wouldn't have to work on myself.
Of course.
As I've got older, and wisdom comes from age, and as I got older and I started social work, so I attribute a lot of my self-awareness to social work, actually, and going back and studying as a mature age student, because I wasn't a social worker for the first 15 years of my career. I was just a public servant. I wouldn't say just a public servant, did some really good jobs, but I had a social science degree, which was very generic, didn't really make me a professional or a specialist in a certain area. And so I felt the need to learn and go back and study. And I'm glad I did, because as a mature age student, I tried a lot harder at my degree than I did at my bachelor's degree straight out of high school. And so social work enabled me to explore theory and grand theories. You know, we talk about consumerism, capitalism, feminism, all the isms in the world, and understand the world and how it operates. This is the first time I started thinking about social constructs of masculinity, like how does the world influence the way that we behave and vice versa? How do we influence the world in our behaviors as well? I was able to put a spotlight on mental health. I'm like, okay, this is what it means from a mental health perspective, from a theoretical perspective, from a practical perspective, from a systems perspective as well. So I could start to understand a broader awareness of what mental health was, because all we get in the media is snippets. Right. You know, this person's got a mental health thing, or these are the suicide data, or whatever it is. There's snippets. We don't get the deep down stuff. And I'm not a reader, so I'm not going to go naturally to a library and start reading on stuff. Like, I have to go and engage in a course or something for me to embed knowledge. And so started learning about all that type of stuff. It's the first time I started looking at my drinking as well, and substance use. Why do we use substances? What's the reason for them? And so I started to tune into that type of stuff, but also like just what it meant to be a man. And social work is a degree that is surrounded by feminists. There's not many men that do social work degrees. In fact, there's not many men that do a lot of helping professions. And so seeing the world from a feminist perspective as well, like, okay, I can understand some of this stuff now. I can start to put pieces together. I can understand maybe my mum's life or my wife or my daughter. I can see things maybe through their eyes as opposed to a man's eyes as well. And so all these things, I started to learn how to critically self-reflect. And this is the big one, is I started to learn that A, how am I showing up in the world? And B, how does the world expect me to show up? And C, like, where do I want to go in life? What kind of legacy do I want to live and leave for my kids and their kids and so forth? And so social work enabled me to do that. And then from there, the burnout story just amplified it. It just put the fuel to the fire that made me go, you know what? I'm thinking about this type of stuff. Now I want to start speaking about this type of stuff and really bring other people into the conversation through a podcast like this, through the Mindful Men podcast, through meeting people in my community and wearing Mindful Men t-shirts every single day. And people always say, what's Mindful Men? And so we'd start a conversation about mindfulness and men. So that helped me do the inwards work. Yeah. And from there, when I went to therapy, ever since then, I started doing the homework that therapists give me. I started recognizing why they give you homework, to go and work on yourself, to develop that self-awareness. Because if we don't, then we just stay fucked up. We don't actually heal. We don't move forward. We don't grow. We don't recover. Mental health, we talk about recovery in the mental health space. Recovery comes from doing the work on yourself. And that's A, recognizing you've got a problem in the first place, and B, being self-aware enough to go and sort it out.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. You dropped a lot of good nuggets there. As you were speaking about that last part, I was thinking about the homework that my therapist gave me this week. So yeah, it's always good. And I love, therapists who are also in therapy, because like, I think it's important for people to see that just because we're in this particular field, that doesn't make us exempt from having problems and needing to also do the work. So if you're listening, just do the work. Just know that you can't skip over the process. But Simon, I so appreciate your time today. Really, really appreciate you being able to work with the schedule. Before we get out of here, I want you to share with the audience, how can they connect with you if they want to learn more about Mindful Men, listen to your podcast or network? I know you also have courses and stuff that are available as well that you teach on. So give them all the goods.
Yeah, I mean, the website's the best place. So www.mindful-men.com.au. It is .au because I live in Australia. So that's our little thing that we put at the end of our websites. That connects with all my social media. It connects with my therapy work. If I'm doing courses at a particular time, that's where courses are. I am looking at doing some international coaching as well eventually. So that's a future life goal for me in the next 12 months. Which opens my books to international. So as a social worker, I only practice social work in Australia because of licensing requirements and so forth. But it doesn't mean we can't have a conversation, whether it's through my social media, so on all the different social medias, through the podcast as well, the Mindful Men podcast. And I've also got a free Facebook community for men to come in and just connect. And it's called the Mindful Men Facebook community. Like, there's nothing special about that name, but they can come in, it's for free. They can introduce themselves. I drop in weekly topics around mindfulness and men stuff, and encourage guys just to connect and feel less alone in the world as well. So I'd like to welcome anybody into that particular space as well.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing that information. For all the men that are listening, please make sure that you connect with Simon. We'll make sure that all the information of how you can connect with him is in the description of this episode, so that you can also join that Facebook group and get connected with other men, so that you do not have to suffer in silence, and that there's a community of mindful men out there that you can connect with. You guys, make sure that you also follow me, Tree the LPC, on all social media platforms under the handle Tree the LPC. Until next time, be safe, be well, and make sure that you take care of your mental health.